Voices from Oxford is here at the Blavatnik School of Government, talking to Professor Ngaire Woods, the director of the school. Very nice to see you, Ngaire. One of the things that I'd like to talk with you today about is an orthodoxy that's been around for about 10 years in many countries, in many global regulators, which can be summarised in one word: austerity. And for many people that seemed just like a lot of common sense, spending within your means and budgeting and so on. But there's been something of a counter movement in the last few months, perhaps even the last year. I wonder what your take was on that.
Well, there's been tons of research done on this, particularly by the IMF, that's for 30 years been telling countries, to tighten their belts. And they've somewhat changed their view. And they've changed their view because it can be counterproductive. Right. If a government, just at a time when you're hit by a crisis and a drop in confidence, if the government starts reducing government expenditures, it reduces confidence further and it reduces spending power further if households have got less money. So you end up taking one step forward by the government spending less and two steps backwards because it gets much less revenue and tax and much less growth in the economy.
Right. And that can take you into a sort of a cycle of decline, I guess.
Exactly. So you end up spiralling downwards. And that's why, it might seem intuitive to do austerity, but actually governments need to think much more carefully about how to counter the drop in confidence and the drop in economic growth.
Exactly. So do you think we're coming into a new sort of balance of understanding between that sort of, perhaps it's an older view, the Keynesian sort of view, isn't it, and the more modern...
Well, it's a very refined, it's a very refined form, if you like, of Keynesian. I wouldn't describe it in those terms, but so the IMF would call it looking at automatic stabilizers, or looking at the things that can keep an economy going, even when it's being hit by foul weather and foul tides. So, but governments, of course, sometimes ignore that. And I would argue that the British government, after the financial crisis, because it wanted to placate global capital markets and say, we are serious, we're going to stick to this plan, it overshot. And so some of the cuts that it introduced actually were counterproductive.
And do you think that's being corrected now? Are we back on track, or do you think there's still a way to go?
Well, the trouble is that, as we saw, it not only was counterproductive economically, but it's been hugely counterproductive socially, culturally, politically, because some 2/5 of the British population have really felt the impact of those cuts and absolutely revolted against the government that brought in those cuts, principally voting Brexit. Now, I'm not saying that's the only reason people voted Brexit, but I'm saying that travelling around Britain, talking to people, there were so many people that simply felt that things couldn't get worse for them.
Right. So is the lesson from that, I mean, this is where economics and government really play together, and politics. Is the lesson from that there's going to need to be an overcorrection the other direction in order just to undo some of that political dissatisfaction and distancing, or can things gradually just come back to equilibrium?
So I think that the lesson for governments is, if you're hit by a crisis, you've got to respond to the fact that business confidence has been hit and people's confidence have been hit, and that government, instead of just going with the flow and contracting like everybody else, sometimes need to act counter to the flow, or counter-cyclically, as economists would say, so that governments must sometimes invest at just the moment that others are not doing so, because it sustains not just economic activity, but it sustains confidence.